Have you ever forgotten a simple name and felt that chill? What if it's not just tiredness? This silent fear that many carry has a reason to exist because brain decline begins decades before the first symptom, and no one warns you. But there is a combination of simple elements proven by science capable of protecting your mind now before the damage appears. I am Dr. Kevin DeVries, a neurologist with over 15 years of experience treating patients. And what I am going to reveal today could change the course of your aging. The brain under silent attack. There is something happening in the brains of many people at this very moment that no routine exam will detect, and that no doctor will mention during a consultation because the symptoms haven't arrived yet. This isn't alarmism. It is pure physiology, and I need you to understand this clearly. There are two proteins called beta amyloid and tau. Under normal conditions, they are part of brain function. But when the balance is broken, these proteins begin to accumulate in places they shouldn't, forming what we call plaques and tangles. Think of it like this. Imagine the brain is a city connected by fiber optic cables. These deposits are like debris thrown inside those cables. Over time, the signal starts to freeze, delay, and lose quality. And you don't notice because the brain compensates for a long time before giving in. What strikes me most about this dynamic, after more than 15 years of following patients, is how far this silent process has already advanced when the first real forgetfulness appears. A person comes into the office worried because they forgot a neighbor's name or left their keys in the wrong place. But this forgetfulness is not the beginning of the problem. It is the surface of something that started years, sometimes decades earlier. I have seen this repeat in many patients who came to me convinced they were fine. And they were functioning, it's true. But beneath that appearance of normality, the destruction already had an address and was well underway. The brain endures, compensates, and bypasses until it can't anymore. Here enters a detail that almost no one notices. The moment symptoms appear is not the moment the problem begins. It is the moment the brain has exhausted its capacity to hide the damage. The invisible epidemic of dementia. The numbers I'm about to show you are hard to ignore. About 1.8 million Brazilians over the age of 60 are already living with some form of dementia. But what truly worries me, after more than 15 years of following patients, is not that number. It is what it hides. Because 80% of these cases have not yet been diagnosed. This means that nearly 15 million people are losing their memory at this moment without knowing it, without treatment, and without any guidance. I hear this every week in the office. A 67-year-old woman who forgets her grandchildren's names and thinks it's just old age. A 72-year-old man who gets lost in simple routines he used to do with his eyes closed and says he's just tired. And the problem is that they aren't wrong to normalize these signs because no one ever alerted them to what might actually be happening inside. The World Health Organization projects that by 2050, the number of affected people worldwide will triple, reaching 150 million people. That is more than the population of entire countries. Keep that number in mind. And most of these people will reach that point without a diagnosis, without preparation, and without any real chance of slowing down the process. Here enters a detail that almost no one notices. Dementia doesn't arrive suddenly. It sets in silently, bit by bit, like a leak that weakens the structure without leaving anything visible on the outside. By the time the signs become evident, much has already been lost. And that is exactly why understanding this reality clearly before you need to can completely change what lies ahead. Turmeric as a brain ally. There is a spice present in the kitchens of many families for decades, which researchers at UCLA took into the lab to understand what it does to the human brain. What they found changed how I guide patients over 50 who come to the office worried about their memory. Curcumin, the active compound in turmeric, was tested with adults between 50 and 84 years old over 18 months. The group that consumed it showed a 28% improvement in memory tests. Stay with me, because this number needs context to make sense. No drug approved for the treatment of Alzheimer's has come close to such a result in similar populations. None. But the data that caught my attention most wasn't the performance on the tests. It was what appeared in brain images. There was a visible reduction in the accumulation of beta amyloid in regions linked to memory. Beta amyloid acts like debris that deposits between neurons over the years, interfering with their communication. When this debris grows too much, reasoning begins to fail in ways the person attributes to fatigue or age. Except it's not just fatigue. I see this in my practice with an unsettling frequency. People who forget names, lose the thread of conversations, and normalize everything as if it were inevitable. It isn't. And science is showing that simple interventions made early enough can change this course. Chronic inflammation as the hidden enemy. The human body is extraordinarily patient. It endures years of silent aggression before giving any visible sign that something is wrong. And that is exactly what makes low-grade chronic inflammation so dangerous. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't show up on conventional exams, and it gives no clear warning. I see this frequently in the office. Patients arriving worried about forgetfulness, fatigue that won't go away, and difficulty concentrating. And when we deepen the investigation, a chronic inflammatory state appears that has been installed for years, corroding brain tissue without anyone noticing. Think of rust on metal. It doesn't make noise, it doesn't warn you, but it wears down the structure from the inside until the damage is done. Chronic inflammation acts like that, slowly, without drama, but with real and cumulative consequences. What feeds this process? Largely our diet. Excess sugar, ultra-processed foods, and poor quality saturated fats act as fuel for this silent fire. And here is a detail almost no one notices. You don't need to eat extremely poorly to sustain this state. The accumulation of mediocre choices over the years is enough. A 2024 systematic review confirmed that over 80% of the studies analyzed pointed to curcumin as being able to significantly reduce inflammatory markers in the brain. This is peer-reviewed science with real implications for anyone wanting to protect their mind as they age. BDNF, the fertilizer for the aging brain. Imagine a plant without fertilizer. It doesn't die immediately, but it slowly loses its strength. The leaves get thinner, growth stops, and it starts to shrink without anyone clearly perceiving what is happening. The brain ages in a very similar way when a protein called BDNF begins to drop. BDNF stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and I usually call it brain fertilizer because that is exactly what it does. It stimulates the birth of new neurons, strengthens existing connections, and keeps the brain plastic, meaning capable of learning, adapting, and recovering. After 50, these levels naturally fall. And when they fall, the brain literally begins to shrink. I see this in my practice with a frequency that worries me. Patients saying their memory isn't the same, forgetting names, losing the thread of conversation, needing to reread the same paragraph twice. They think it's just age. But what is happening in many of these cases is a progressive drop in BDNF that could be fought. What curcumin showed in studies is a real ability to raise these levels. And this changes the conversation about brain aging significantly, because it means the brain doesn't have to simply accept this decline as inevitable. Even after age 70, neuroplasticity can be preserved, as long as the brain receives the support it needs. The fatal problem: turmeric without absorption doesn't work. There is a situation I see often in the office. People who tried turmeric for weeks, sometimes months, and felt absolutely nothing. No improvement, no change. And they concluded, rightly based on what they experienced, that the ingredients simply didn't work for them. But the problem wasn't the turmeric, it was the pathway. Curcumin, the active compound in turmeric, has a characteristic that very few people know. It is very poorly absorbed by the intestine when consumed alone. It's like putting a letter without an address in the mail. It exists, it has everything it needs to say, but it never reaches its destination. When you consume turmeric powder or simple capsules, most of the curcumin passes through the digestive system practically intact. It passes through, but it doesn't penetrate. It doesn't enter the bloodstream. It doesn't reach the brain, which is exactly where it needs to act to make a real difference. Throughout my practice, I have followed patients who used turmeric for months without any results, simply because they were consuming it the wrong way. A 68-year-old lady came to me convinced it wouldn't work for her, that her body was different. When we understood the reason for the failure together and corrected the approach, the story changed completely. What no one explains is that the ingredient by itself is not enough. It's no use having the right compound if the body can't actually use it. Effectiveness isn't just in what you consume, but in how much of it actually enters circulation and gets where it needs to go. When curcumin doesn't cross that barrier, it doesn't fail. It simply never had the chance to act. The trio that boosts absorption by 2,000%. 3 elements, just 3. And the difference between taking turmeric every day with 0 results and finally feeling what this compound can do for your body lies exactly in this combination. I have had to explain this dozens of times throughout my career because most people come to me with the right turmeric, the right dose, the right intention, and still no results. The problem was never the spice. It was what was missing around it. Curcumin, the active compound in turmeric, has an enemy inside your own body, an enzyme in the liver that recognizes this substance as foreign and eliminates it before it reaches the blood. It works like a strict bouncer, blocking entry before you are even announced. This is why, on its own, curcumin barely manages to cross that barrier. But piperine, the active compound in black pepper, acts directly on that bouncer. It temporarily inhibits that hepatic enzyme, clearing the way for curcumin to pass. The result, according to consolidated studies, is an increase of up to 2,000% in absorption. 2,000% is not marketing hype. It is what happens when you understand biochemistry and respect it. Now comes the second point, which almost no one mentions. Curcumin is fat soluble. This means it only dissolves in fat, never in water. If you take turmeric with juice, tea, or any watery drink, much of it will pass through the digestive system without being absorbed. It's like trying to dissolve sugar in oil. It just doesn't happen. A spoonful of olive oil, half an avocado, a source of quality fat along with the turmeric, completely changes this scenario. When these 3 elements work together, turmeric, black pepper, and healthy fat, you aren't just consuming a spice. You are creating the real conditions for curcumin to get where it needs to go and do what science has documented it can do. The practical protocol to start today. There comes a moment when information needs to leave the paper and enter the routine. And that moment can be today, early in the morning, even before coffee. The recipe is simple. Dissolve half to 1 teaspoon of turmeric powder in a glass of warm plant-based milk or warm water. Add a drizzle of extra virgin olive oil and a pinch of ground black pepper. You don't need a scale, you don't need precise measurement. You need consistency. I usually tell my patients that this morning preparation works like a ritual of care. The fat from the oil and the active compound in the pepper, piperine, open the door for the curcumin to cross the intestinal barrier and reach where it needs to go. Without these two, most of what you ingested will go away without fulfilling any function. It's like taking medicine without water. The active principle gets left behind. Throughout the day, turmeric can appear in other ways without any sacrifice. In rice, in soups, in scrambled eggs, in a salad seasoned with olive oil. Every time you include this spice in a meal with healthy fat, you are repeating the protocol. And it is this repetition that matters. The meta-analysis published in 2025 makes this very clear. Cognitive effects start to appear with at least 24 weeks of regular use. 6 months. Not 6 days, not 6 weeks, 6 months of daily presence. This might sound like a long time, but think of it another way. 6 months is a time that will pass anyway. The difference is what you do during it. Deep sleep, the brain's nightly wash. At night, while you sleep, something extraordinary happens inside your head. The brain, which worked non-stop during the day, activates a silent and powerful cleaning system that very few people know about. This system is called the glymphatic system, and the best way to understand it is to imagine a network of tiny channels that only open during deep sleep. It's as if the brain waits for the silence of the night to finally deal with the day's accumulation. What do these channels do? They eliminate toxic proteins that deposited over the hours. Among them, beta amyloid, one of the most studied substances regarding cognitive decline. Over more than 15 years of following patients, I've seen how much this detail is ignored. Most people know sleep is important, but they don't know exactly why, and that difference matters a lot. When sleep is short, fragmented, or shallow, these channels cannot complete the job. The brain trash stays. It keeps accumulating. And accumulating beta amyloid in the brain is not without consequences. It is a silent process, without pain, without clear warning, but over time it compromises memory, reasoning, and mental clarity in ways the person easily confuses with normal aging. What comes now is important. Sleeping poorly for years works like maintenance that is always postponed, like a car that never goes for a service. You don't notice the wear until something visibly fails. 7 to 8 hours a night is not a luxury or a generic recommendation. It is the minimum time for this cleaning process to happen completely. No supplement, no vitamin, no other habit replaces this. Deep sleep is non-negotiable within any serious brain health protocol. Physical movement as brain medicine. There is something many doctors still underestimate in the conversation about brain health: the power of simply moving the body. I'm not talking about the gym or intense training. I'm talking about walking. 30 minutes a day, 5 times a week. And what that walk does inside your brain completely changes the way we view aging. When you walk, blood flow to the brain increases immediately, reaching deep regions like the hippocampus. Think of the hippocampus as the central archive of memory, where memories are formed and retrieved. Regular exercise feeds this archive and stimulates the formation of new neurons in this region, something that contradicts the idea that the adult brain doesn't regenerate. It does regenerate, but it needs stimulation. Here enters a detail almost no one notices. Exercise raises the levels of a protein called BDNF, which acts as fertilizer for neurons. It protects brain cells, strengthens connections, and favors new neural networks. And when this BDNF is high, turmeric acts much more efficiently, because the two work on complementary pathways within the nervous system. Over more than 15 years of following patients, I see this regularly. Those who add walking to their routine report weeks later a mental clarity they hadn't felt in a long time. It isn't subjective perception, it is physiology. Physical movement is not a complement to brain care, it is a central part of it. Social isolation, the underestimated enemy. Prolonged loneliness ages the brain faster than many things we usually fear. This isn't a metaphor. It is what consistent studies over decades continue to show. Social isolation ranks among the highest known risk factors for dementia. And what worries me in my clinical practice is that it has arrived silently for an entire generation. A person retires, children create their own routines, the circle shrinks. At first, it just seems like a quieter pace. But what is happening underneath is that the brain begins to be deprived of something it needs as much as oxygen: real human stimulus, conversation, exchange, presence. I see people who have spent months talking to very few people besides close family. And when they reach the office, the difference in processing and response agility is noticeable. Stay with me, because here enters a detail that almost no one explains properly. Social interaction activates regions of the brain in a way that no supplement can replicate. When you talk, you are processing language, reading expressions, managing emotional context, and building responses in real time. It is a complete cognitive workout, happening naturally without you noticing. I met a patient, a 67-year-old man, who after retirement started leaving the house basically only to go to the grocery store. 2 years later, the family noticed changes. When he went back to attending a weekly domino group, the difference was gradual but real. What returned was the regular stimulation, the social commitment, the reason to be present. It doesn't have to be anything grand. Any form of consistent human coexistence already protects. What doesn't protect is prolonged silence, disguised as rest. 40% of dementia cases are preventable. 40%. That number might seem small written like that, but what it represents completely changes how we look at aging. The Lancet report, one of the most respected medical publications in the world, concluded that nearly half of all dementia cases could be avoided or delayed for years, not with inaccessible treatments, but with factors that are in large part within our control. I need to be honest with you about this. In over 15 years of following patients, I've seen many people believe that dementia was a fate sealed by genetics or age. But science says otherwise. Uncontrolled hypertension, poorly managed diabetes, nutrient-poor diet, sedentary lifestyle, and smoking are the major silent villains preparing the ground for cognitive decline. What makes these factors even more dangerous is precisely their silence. A slightly elevated blood pressure that no one treats, a blood sugar that isn't that high, an increasingly stagnant routine that seems harmless. It is in this invisible accumulation that the risk grows, year after year, without warning. I had a 74-year-old patient who arrived convinced it was too late to change anything. She had had high blood pressure for years, walked little, and ate poorly. We worked together on these specific points. Months later, she told me herself that she thought more clearly and felt more present in her daily life. This type of result is not an exception. It is what happens when a person realizes they still have a margin for action, even decades after bad habits have been established. You have a margin for action. That is what 15 years in the clinic have taught me. Start today. 1 spoonful of turmeric, a pinch of black pepper, a drizzle of olive oil. Simple as that. Tell me here in the comments, did you already know about the power of this trio for the brain? If this content made sense to you, subscribe to the channel, because every week there is information like this to protect your mind and the minds of those you love. Take good care of yourself, and take good care of those you love.